Hello, my name is Kinlock and I really like musical theatre, so when I go see musicals, I have a lot of thoughts and then I throw them out into the universe this way, and so hopefully that's why you're here, because you want to hear me think out loud about musicals. Today I will be talking about Sunset Boulevard, the version that's currently playing in Melbourne, starring Sarah Brightman. We will get to that, but I want to start by just talking about the show and what it is and stuff. So it is an Andrew Lloyd Webber musical, and it is based on... Oh, why am I telling you that? You know what it's based on. But what I do want to sort of say about the Andrew Lloyd Webber-ness of it is that Sarah Brightman and Andrew Lloyd Webber have had this long relationship and association with each other. She has starred in a few of his shows like Cats, Phantom of the Opera, Aspects of Love, and they are the biggest kind of musical theatre moments of her career. She is most closely associated with Christine Daae in, what's it called? Phantom of the Opera? Yeah, so Phantom of the Opera. She originated that role, and it made her famous. And that story is pretty much just a Beauty and the Beast kind of thing, right? Like, she is the demure ingenue. She's captive to this freaky kind of older creep guy, and they hang out in dungeons, and Stockholm Syndrome ensues maybe, and there's a relationship. Very Beauty and the Beast, right? And so I sort of understand from Sarah Brightman's point of view, after playing that role for so many years, why she might be interested in playing Norma Desmond, because Norma Desmond and Joe Gillis also have like a Beauty and the Beast kind of relationship thing happening, but she would get to play the captor, and he is the captive, and it's a very sort of different dynamic that unfolds, but it's also sort of the same. There's still a lot of like mansion and a lot of Stockholm Syndrome. So in that sense, I sort of thought, I see why she might be attracted to the role. I can see why Sarah Brightman and an Andrew Lloyd Webber musical like could kind of sell tickets, because they used to be married to each other. People think of them in the same way. But I also think that, like, in Australia at least, people don't have a huge affection for either of those things right now. It's not where musical theatre is at or anything. And so it's a little bit of a surprise to be putting on Sunset Boulevard and doing such an old school version of it and doing nothing really new with it. Like, for instance, the version that's about to head to Broadway. And then putting such an old school star in it with the Sarah Brightman of it all. And it's like, okay, yeah, who is this for? Who are you trying to sell this to? I went out of curiosity because it was intriguing. So I saw the show, and I saw Sarah Brightman, and I saw Tim Draxel playing Joe Gillis, and I enjoyed a lot of things about the show, but I also sort of had a lot of questions about it. And then I saw alternate casting, so I saw Sylvie Paladino playing Norma Desmond, and I saw Billy Boucher playing, why do I keep forgetting his name? Joe Gillis. And that was such a different experience. It's crazy how casting matters. So we're going to get into that, but first I want to talk about other aspects of the show, because I feel like they haven't quite been given enough attention in a lot of the media discourse. So the first time I saw it, my immediate reaction, the thing that I came away with, just like that I thought was most memorable and the best sort of aspect of the show, were the visual elements of the set and costumes. The set is just quite elaborate. It's just really beautiful. there's this mansion that rolls on stage, and it's, you know, got this winding staircase, and it's very grand, it's quite gothic. There's these black lace curtains that drop down and do some sort of like weird curtain choreography, but that's quite visually cool because black embroidered lace curtains on that scale, it's fun. And the costumes I think were the most consistently excellent part. Like, every costume looked perfect, fitted the actor very well, and just sold the time period. And I don't know a lot about, you know, costumes and that era and stuff, but everything looked like it just was evoking late 1940s and Hollywood glamour, and just, you know, the way people had their hair and the cinched waists and the lengths of the skirts and I don't know, everything was just beautiful to look at. A visual feast, if you will. So another visual element is lighting and projections. There were projections, not so much in a sense that a movie is projected, but just like shapes and stuff. And there were some interesting choices there. Like, there were some good lighting moments and some odd lighting moments. One that comes to mind is in Act 2, and they're in Norma's mansion, and finally Betty, the ingenue love interest of it all, comes to this mansion to find out what it's all about. And she's like, "Joe, is this where you live?" And he's like, yeah, it is. And she's like, "Who does it belong to?" And he's like, "Guess." And so she looks around at the pictures on the wall, and she's like, "That's Norma Desmond, and that's Norma Desmond, and that's Norma Desmond, and that's Norma Desmond." And it's all done to music, so it's quite fast and it's timed, and there's this really weird lighting sequence that happens. So every time she says Norma Desmond, the picture that she's referring to on the wall lights up with this like very bright, piercing projection from the other side of the back of the stage, and it's like lightning hitting this picture on the wall to frame it. And I mean, it's impressive to have such precise lighting, but also it's so quick that you can't like take it in. It's like, "That's Norma Desmond, that's Norma Desmond." I did not see all of those, and I couldn't tell what they were lighting up because it's lighting up really small things, and I don't know what's on there. And it just comes at a point where it's like, you know, 3/4 of the way through the show, and tonally it was really out of step with everything else that's happened, and it's sort of like a real climactic, dramatic moment, and then it sort of like cuts through that and dissipates it a little bit, which was not ideal. So that was strange. And then there's a similar kind of lighting moment right at the end of the show. It's like the final bars of Norma singing, and then suddenly we get these flash lighting moments lighting up some of the main characters. Artie, who cares? Max, who also who cares? And then like Betty, and then Joe, and then back to Norma. And so it's just like, oh, we had this musical timing moment of flash, 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 flash. So we're going to light up those 4 people, only 2 of whom you care about. It just didn't have any payoff, and it didn't really work, but whatever. So those were the visual elements. Thinking about sound, the orchestra sounded so lush. Like, that was a huge part of what I enjoyed about this production. I think it's the Melbourne Orchestra, whatever that is. But yeah, they sound so good. And if we just avoid talking about the main characters for a moment, anytime it's like the ensemble numbers, for instance, the ensemble creates such a great sound together. They all have such beautiful, incredible voices, and the orchestra is great, and all of that marries to this beautiful, rich sound. That's what you go to musicals for, and I loved those moments where everything's just like singing their lungs out, and you've just got this huge sound just reverberating in the auditorium, and it brings everyone who's in there experiencing that together. It's magical. That happened in like every ensemble number. And so let's talk about the ensemble numbers. Okay, so the first one that sort of happens, opens the show, is Let's Have Lunch. And it was overly choreographed, I think. Like, it was kind of fun. I was like, oh, this is a direction that you can go with this song. And it was like, let's have lunch. But like the choreography was, a lot of it was, felt quite modern and sort of anachronistic. And that's okay. Like, I don't mind a bit of that. It sort of could be fun. And then it did a similar thing for, there's a song where Joe gets a makeover and Norma's wanting to buy him a whole lot of clothes. And so there's all these men who come from, I guess, like the local department store to like dress him. And they're all like very gay. They're wearing pink socks, so they must be. And they're doing all this like very jaunty, edgy, sort of sharp choreography. It looks really cool, and the dancers who do it, they pull it off. Like, it looks good, but the opening number and that number, they just don't really like mesh with the rest of the show, like the tone and the style of the rest of it. And so it's a bit jarring. The other choreographed number that just really like didn't work for me is there's also sort of a bit of a makeover moment for Norma where she's having different people sing at her. And my understanding, just based on like what they're saying or singing, is like, you know, the first person that speaks is her astrologer, and then another person is like giving her surgery, and then another person is just like rubbing creams into her face, and someone else is doing an injection. And so like some of them are woo-woo and some of them are a bit more medical, and other it's like she's at a day spa. So I think it's supposed to read like a montage. This isn't they need to adore me, so Kristen Dior me. It's not her telling a bunch of people what to do to her. It's like a montage of her being in different places with having different people do different things. So I would sort of see it as like one comes in at a time, and then the next one comes in, then the next one comes in, and like they're all dressed differently because they're all in a different place. It's sort of like that one in Groundhog Day when he's going to all the different alternative therapy things. It's sort of like a montage of that. It's more like that, and yet it's not staged like that. It's staged with like all these girls in nursing uniforms, and I'm like, but why are they all in nursing uniforms? And why are they all in one place dancing together in a circle when the reality is they would all be in different places and they're all not all nurses? Like, it just didn't tell the story. And I also don't think people look good in white. That's just a random opinion that no one asked for, but hey, we want people to look good. The costumes kind of looked fine if they were on the right person, I guess, but not everyone's complexion works with white. I say this as someone who doesn't wear white for that reason. Yeah, so perhaps I'm just overly sensitive to other people wearing white. I'm either going to be jealous or I'm going to be like, see, that makes my point. It doesn't look good. Yeah, okay. So the group numbers that worked really well were like the one in Schwab's and the one at the New Year's party, where it's just like the ensemble sort of having fun together and like having all these conversations and stuff. And there were little choreographed moments, and everyone's like singing a little bit, singing a little bit, singing a little bit. And they're all sort of coming together, and they each get their little moments alone, but also their moments together and the harmonies. And they worked super well because the choreography worked in tandem with telling the story, and it didn't dominate. And it also wasn't anachronistic the way that some of the other moments were. So that was my thoughts on the choreography and the ensemble numbers. Speaking of those ensemble moments, the first time I saw it, I felt such relief anytime a female ensemble member opened her mouth, because I was like, oh, that's the voice I've been waiting for. Like, I feel like anyone on that stage could have done Norma, except for Sarah Brightman. Ugh, And there were things about Sarah Brightman, her performance as Norma, that I sort of enjoyed, but just none of them was the singing. So, like, she had a different take on the character than what you'd expect. She sort of played it a bit softer, a bit girlier, like the flowing hair, sort of very ethereal, and like that's sort of her brand a little bit, and it's how she's known, so it worked. And it's also, I thought, could be supported by the fact that she still sees herself as this ingenue, that she could play a 16-year-old on screen, and that would be a normal thing to happen. She's 50. So I thought that that sort of softness and frailty sort of worked for the character as a concept, but the execution of it didn't work because she can't really act, and also just because, like, it goes against the way that the music is written, even if nothing else. And so her songs are just associated with being belted out by the likes of Patti LuPone or Betty Buckley or Nicole Scherzinger or, Elaine Page. Like, there's all these iconic divas who have, like, thrown themselves into this role. Glenn Close, and, their voices are big and strong and strident. And then Sarah Brightman comes along and they transpose everything up into this operatic soprano register, and she's like, and she goes all like, I'm internal, I'm like in a little world of my own kind of thing. And it's like, okay, but that's not what we're here for. If that was the way that this role had always been played, the show would have bombed and no one would have ever remembered it. We are here for you to belt our faces off, please, and I can't even hear you. So do a character that can do that, or just like leave. So yeah, her take on the character was interesting and felt supported by the script in a lot of ways, but it didn't really work with the music and audience expectations and satisfaction. So that was how I thought about Sarah Brightman in the role, which is why I've kind of been saying, oh, so she was starring in this, was she? Because when I saw it with her in it, it didn't feel like she was the star of the show at all. It felt like the star of the show was the costumes. It felt like the main character was Joe Gillis, because Tim Draxel, he's a great actor, and he has at least 6 abs that are very nice to look at on stage. Like, he's got what you want from a leading man. He can sing the part. He understood who this character was and played it in a very, like, charming but jaded sort of way. And, he sort of narrates a lot of it direct to audience, but then also is in the character, and he flicked in and out of that very well. And so Tim Draxel was the star of this show, and to me it just felt like the main story was about Joe and Betty. So Betty's his other love interest, and Betty is played by Ashley Rubinak, and jaw to the floor. Like, I've seen her in 2 shows this year, Groundhog Day and now Sunset Boulevard. I saw both of those shows twice each, and she just knocks it out of the park every time, and she is a star on the rise. Like, come on, let's give her a show. She feels like a Megan Hilty, like Australia's answer to Megan Hilty. If you know anything about what I'm talking about, you are a geek too. So coming back to Tim Draxel's portrayal of Joe Gillis, sorry. It worked for me. It worked. But his voice was a little light, but then also hers was so light that I was like, well, maybe he's pandering to match her, so it's fine. It just read a little strange when he would have these scenes with Betty, because there's this really unfortunate thing that the script does where it identifies that Norma is 50 and it identifies that Betty is 22. And I'm sorry, I bumped the camera. It never really identifies exactly how old Joe Gillis is, but you're looking at Tim Draxel, he's in his early 40s, and so you're like, okay, this character's in his early 40s. Which, someone who's 42 making out with a 50-year-old, it's actually like believable, fine, not that uncomfortable. It's like, okay, there's like a power dynamic and they've got this Beauty and the Beast thing going on, but also like, I can see that happening. But then he turns around and like strikes up this thing with a 22-year-old, and it's like, oh, that's sort of more problematic, actually. Like, a 20-year age difference can be okay, but if we were supposed to be bothered about the 8-year age difference between them two, shouldn't we be even more disturbed about the 20-year age difference over here? And so, like, the dynamic between him and Betty, like, was a little bit coloured with that for me, because this is a show about age. Amongst many other things, it is a show about age. So I couldn't not think about that. However, seeing the alternate performers, as I did, so Sylvie Paladino and Billy Boucher, in his turn as Joe, he looks like he's in his late 20s. So yeah, he doesn't play the role quite as jaded and stuff, but when he's with Betty, it makes so much sense. They look like they're the same age. They've just got chemistry and it works. And it also makes it so much more uncomfortable when Norma is hitting on him, because he's just sort of like, really, lady? But also like the way that he kind of gives into that, it feels very different to when Tim Draxel Gillis gives into that. You know what I mean? Did any of that make sense? So I thought that having a younger Joe works better for me, especially in this day and age kind of thing, especially so much of it is about abuse of a power dynamic, and that is something that we're quite, well, I think the way we see that now is perhaps not the way it used to be seen, and so it's helpful to have things like a younger Joe so that he doesn't turn around and become the Beast himself. That's a different story. Beauty and the Beast and the Beast. So that leaves one thing I haven't talked about yet, and that's Sylvie Paladino. I didn't just mean to call you a thing, Sylvie. You are more than a thing. You are a person, and an amazing actor, and perhaps the greatest star of all. She just was everything you want a Norma to be. Oh, vocally, I could just, there's something I've noticed a lot for myself when I listen to singers, that sometimes you're listening to them going, are they going to hit that high note? Oh, is their voice going to squeak? Oh, are they going to be pitchy? Like, you're just kind of like, not sure. And then other people who they start singing and like there's a security. Their voice just kind of like picks you up and takes you with it. And you're just like, oh, I am secure in listening to this. Wherever it goes, I'm here for the journey. And yeah, it's like riding on a magic carpet. It's great. It'll be fine. And her voice is like that. There was never any doubt that she might not hit a note. Everything just glided so effortlessly from one part of her voice to another, and she just does it all, and it all sounds fantastic. And Billy Bush is the same. He's got this beautiful, rich baritone sort of voice, which is interesting because he's been playing tenor roles like Tony in West Side Story and Chris in Miss Saigon, and if he's got the tenor range and the beautiful, rich baritone, what can he not do? Like, just give him all the roles now. Why are we waiting to see him like cover a role for some, I don't think he was planned to be, it wasn't announced that he was going to be in this show. It was like, I don't know, maybe Tim Draxel's sick or something. It was like an accidental understudy moment. It's like, why are these people who are truly the most gifted and talented not being given the roles in the first place? Oh, that it gets frustrating, you know? So we now have Sunset Boulevard playing in Melbourne. If you go see it with Sarah Brightman, you're going to get a very, 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 very different show than if you go see it with Sylvie Paladino. And if you see it with Tim Draxel, you're going to have a different show than if you see it with Billy Boucher. Even though I enjoyed both, there were different things about each performance I enjoyed. So the one that I liked best was the one with Sylvie and Billy in those roles. And I was lucky enough to see Ashley Rubinette twice because I would have been upset if anyone had played her role instead of her. She's literally perfect. So, yeah, I don't know what to make of that. Like, if I had to assign like a star rating to this show, that would be really hard because there's so many ups and downs and variables. And so I'm not going to assign any stars. I'm just going to say that being a famous star doesn't necessarily make you right for every role. Okay, I think you know what I'm saying.